At just 8 years old, I was heartlessly cast out by my folks. I roamed all night until my aunt discovered me and gave me shelter. When she was just 8 years old, Lena Carter was thrown out of her home by her cold, perfection-obsessed parents. After returning from school, she faced their disappointment over a test grade. Her mother, consumed with rage, struck her across the face, sending her stumbling onto the street. Her father stood by silently, offering no protection. That night, Lena realized something heartbreaking. She was truly unwanted in the home where she was supposed to feel safest. Lena grew up in a picture-perfect house in Portland, Oregon. A home that looked more like a showroom than a place to raise children. Her parents, Gregory and Elaine Carter, were both high-profile attorneys, admired for their intelligence and relentless drive. They demanded perfection in every aspect of life, especially from their children. Lena's younger brother, Ethan, was everything they had hoped for: charming, naturally gifted, and academically brilliant. Every time Ethan achieved something, their home lit up with praise and celebration. But when Lena worked hard and succeeded, it was met with cold silence, or worse, criticism. If Lena got a B, it was treated like a disgrace. But when Ethan received an A, it was party-worthy. If Lena asked for help with schoolwork, she was told to figure it out, while Ethan was handed private tutors without question. It became painfully clear Ethan was the golden child, and Lena was simply the unwanted second. She spent her early years desperately trying to earn their love, pushing herself to be better, smarter, more obedient. But no matter how hard she tried, Lena remained invisible, unless she failed. Success brought no affection, only expectations. Failure brought shame. This silent, emotional neglect carved deep wounds. She wasn't just unloved, she was unwanted. And eventually that truth would become impossible to ignore. That night marked the turning point in Lena's life, the moment everything fell apart. She had just returned home after school, exhausted but hopeful. She had studied relentlessly for a math test, pouring every ounce of effort into it, praying it would finally be enough to impress her parents. But when she received a C+, her heart sank. She knew what was coming. As she entered the house, the air was thick with tension. From the hallway, Lena could hear her parents arguing in the living room. Her name cut through their voices like a knife. "She's an embarrassment," her mother Elaine hissed. "We've given her everything," her father Gregory snapped. "And she still fails." Lena froze. Their words crushed her. She had hoped for even a sliver of encouragement, but instead she heard them discussing whether she belonged in the family at all. Then came the moment she would never forget. After dinner, they summoned her into the living room. Her father sat coldly, arms crossed. Her mother stood beside him, unreadable. Her brother Ethan was nowhere in sight, shielded from the ugliest parts of the family. "You're not meeting our expectations," Gregory said flatly. "We're done trying to fix you." Lena's voice trembled. "Where would I go?" "Figure it out," he replied, unmoved. Desperate, Lena reached out to her mother, pleading for one last chance. But instead of compassion, Elaine struck her across the face. A sudden, brutal hit that sent her staggering backward, her cheek burning with pain. Stunned, Lena looked to her father for help. He didn't even blink. "Get out," her mother ordered coldly. Something inside Lena shattered. Without another word, she turned, packed a small bag with trembling hands, and left the only home she had ever known. Not because she wanted to, but because her own parents made it clear. She wasn't welcome anymore. The front door slammed behind her, and just like that, Lena was alone in the world. The cold night air bit at her skin as she stood on the porch, clutching her worn-out backpack and small suitcase. Her mother's contempt still echoed in her ears, and her father hadn't even looked up from his newspaper. She hesitated for a moment, hoping, praying, that someone would call her back in. But no one did. With nowhere else to go, Lena started walking. The streets of Portland felt strange and foreign under the dim glow of street lamps. The sidewalks stretched endlessly ahead, and the chill seemed to seep into her bones. Every house she passed was filled with light and warmth, laughter, television, life. But none of it belonged to her. She didn't have a plan, no friends to call, no money, just the clothes on her back and a heart crushed under the weight of betrayal. Her cheek still throbbed where her mother had hit her, and the silence of the night only amplified the ache inside her. As the hours dragged on, fatigue settled deep in her body, and her empty stomach twisted with hunger. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stay warm, while her legs burned from walking aimlessly. For the first time in her young life, Lena truly understood what it meant to be abandoned. Alone, hurting, and afraid, she kept walking into the dark, searching for safety in a world that had suddenly become a stranger. Just when Lena thought she couldn't take another step, she heard a voice cut through the night. Soft, familiar, and full of concern. "Lena." She froze. Her heart pounded as she turned toward the sound, unsure if she was imagining it. But then, through the dim glow of a street lamp, she saw her Aunt Marissa standing just a few feet away, her expression a mixture of shock and worry. "Lena, what are you doing out here?" Lena tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain what had just happened? How could she say that her mother had hit her, that her father had stood by, that she'd been thrown away like trash? Marissa didn't wait for an explanation. She crossed the distance between them and pulled Lena into a hug. The first real hug Lena had felt in years. The warmth and safety of her aunt's arms undid her completely. The walls Lena had built to stay strong crumbled, and deep sobs escaped her lips as she broke down in Marissa's embrace. Marissa didn't ask questions. She just held her tightly, letting Lena cry until she had nothing left. Eventually, when Lena pulled away, Marissa gently touched her bruised cheek. "Did someone hurt you?" she asked, her voice calm but tight with fury. Lena hesitated, then whispered, "It was Mom. She hit me. And then they told me to leave." Marissa's jaw clenched, her eyes darkening. For a moment it looked like she might turn around and march straight to the Carters' house. But instead she took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and said, "Come with me. You're safe now." She took Lena's hand, and for the first time that night, Lena didn't feel alone. As they walked together through the quiet streets, Lena's legs ached and her body throbbed with exhaustion, but for once, she didn't care. She had someone beside her. When they reached Marissa's apartment, a cozy, welcoming space, Lena immediately felt something unfamiliar. Warmth. There were family photos on the walls, soft blankets on the couch, and the scent of something comforting in the air. This wasn't just shelter. It felt like a home. Marissa handed her a bowl of soup and said gently, "Eat first. Then we'll talk." And as Lena took her first bite, warmth began to return. Not just to her body, but to a part of her soul she thought had gone numb. Over the next few days, Lena experienced a kind of peace she had never known. At Aunt Marissa's kitchen table the next morning, she ate scrambled eggs and toast in silence while Marissa sipped her coffee across from her. There were no lectures, no demands for perfection, just calm, steady presence. "You can stay here as long as you need," Marissa said simply. It wasn't a question. It wasn't conditional. Lena hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden," Marissa scoffed gently and shook her head. "Lena, you were never a burden." Those words, so casual yet so powerful, began to loosen the grip of shame Lena had been carrying for years. As the days passed, she started going back to school. At first she felt uncertain, like she was still carrying the weight of her parents' judgment, but slowly something began to change. Without the constant fear of being berated or hit, Lena started to believe in herself. She studied hard, not to earn anyone's approval, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she was capable. Her grades improved. So did her confidence. Marissa reminded her daily that she was smart, capable, and worthy of love, not because of her performance, but because of who she was. Meanwhile, her brother Ethan remained back at their parents' house, still trapped in the same toxic expectations that had once nearly broken Lena. She rarely heard from him in those early years, but part of her still worried about him. Still hoped he'd someday find the courage to break free too. Lena continued to grow, not just academically but emotionally. She was healing. She was no longer the scared little girl waiting for someone to see her worth. She was finally beginning to see it in herself. Years passed, and just when Lena thought her old life was behind her, she received a message that stopped her cold. It was from Ethan. He had never reached out before. Not when she was kicked out, not during holidays or birthdays, but now, out of nowhere, he sent a short, uncertain text. "Can we talk?" Curious and cautious, Lena agreed to meet. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. Ethan looked different, older, more tired, but also like he was carrying something heavy. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Mom and Dad are suffocating me," he confessed. "I told them I want to go to a performing arts school, and they lost it. Said I was throwing my future away." Lena's chest tightened. The pain in his voice was all too familiar. She had once lived it too. "You don't have to keep living like that," she told him gently. "You have a choice, Ethan. You can leave, start over, just like I did." He looked torn. "It's not that easy," he said. "I still live under their roof." Lena reached across the table, her voice steady. "You don't owe them your life. If they can't love you as you are, that's not love." The silence hung heavy between them. Then, slowly, Ethan nodded. A spark of resolve flickered in his eyes. Days later, it happened. Ethan packed a single bag and stood at the front door of their childhood home. Their parents, Gregory and Elaine, were furious, trying to stop him. Their father's voice boomed. "If you leave now, don't expect to come back." Ethan paused at the top of the steps. Then he looked back, calm but firm. "No, Mom, I was nothing with you." And just like that, he turned and walked toward the car where Marissa and Lena were waiting. Marissa hit the gas before their parents could say another word. In the back seat, Ethan let out a shaky breath. He didn't cry. He didn't look back. For the first time in his life, he was free. Ethan spent his first night of freedom in Aunt Marissa's guest room, the same room that had once been Lena's sanctuary years before. He was quiet at first, clearly overwhelmed, not just by what had happened, but by the sudden change in his reality. For a while, he kept to himself. He sat on the edge of the bed, lost in thought, as though trying to process the years of pressure and emotional manipulation he had endured. But Lena didn't push. She knew the weight he was carrying. She'd carried it too. Then, slowly, bit by bit, she started to see glimpses of the real Ethan. He picked up his old guitar, something he hadn't touched in years thanks to their parents' strict expectations. The sound of him strumming it, awkward, rusty, but genuine, brought a smile to Lena's face. They talked more, not just about the past, but about how far they had come. "I used to wait for them to show up," Lena admitted one evening. "I thought they'd realize they were wrong, that they'd come find me, apologize." Ethan nodded. "Me too." Lena looked away for a moment, then shook her head. "But now? I don't care anymore. I don't need them." And for the first time, she meant it. The approval she had once chased felt meaningless now. She had built a life for herself, a peaceful, loving life. She had healed. And now Ethan was beginning to do the same. They weren't broken. They were just finally becoming whole, not by fixing their past, but by building something stronger in its place. One evening, as Ethan absent-mindedly strummed his guitar and Lena flipped through some of his old lyrics, Aunt Marissa looked at the two of them thoughtfully. "What if you did something with all of this?" she asked, her tone curious but serious. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "With what? My music?" Marissa shook her head gently. "No, with your story. With everything you two have survived." Lena frowned. "What do you mean?" "A place," Marissa said, leaning forward. "Somewhere kids like you, like how you both used to be, can go. A place where they feel safe, where they feel seen. A community center." Lena's breath caught for a second. The idea sounded almost too good to be real, but then she looked over at Ethan and saw it click with him, too. They both knew exactly how it felt to grow up unwanted, pressured, dismissed. What if they could create a space where no kid ever had to feel that way again? That night, the three of them stayed up planning, dreaming, sketching out ideas. What started as a passing thought became a shared mission. They didn't just want to move on from their pain, they wanted to turn it into something that mattered, something bigger than themselves. Months of hard work, planning, and heart led to something incredible, the Carter Community Center, named after Lena and Ethan, not their parents. It was a small building, nothing fancy, but it was filled with warmth and purpose. Inside, kids painted, played music, got tutoring help, and, most importantly, felt safe. The three of them had created the very place they once needed so badly. But just as Lena was beginning to feel true peace, an unexpected phone call shook her for a moment. Her mother, Lena, froze when she heard Elaine's voice for the first time in years, calm, cold, and commanding, just like always. "We need to talk," her mother said. Lena clenched her jaw. "We really don't." Her mother let out an impatient sigh. "This little rebellion has gone on long enough." Lena nearly laughed. "You think I built a new life just to spite you?" Her mother pressed on. "Your father's not well. Be reasonable." But Lena didn't budge. "You stopped being my family the day you hit me and threw me out. I don't need your approval anymore." There was silence on the other end. Finally, Lena ended the call. Back at the center, she found Ethan plucking a soft melody on his guitar. Marissa walked in and wrapped her arms around both of them, smiling. "You two have done something amazing," she said. "You turned your pain into something powerful." Lena looked around at the kids, laughing, learning, and just being themselves. Kids who would never feel as alone as she once did. She didn't need her parents. She had something better now. A family she had chosen, and a purpose she had built. "At just 8 years old, I was heartlessly cast out by my folks. I roamed all night until my aunt discovered me and gave me shelter.